Okay, let's test this. Can you hear me talking? Check in the comments if you can hear me talking. I still don't have the visual part fixed. I'm not sure what's wrong with my StreamYard. I'm now trying it on a different computer and it's still not coming across on the video. So it says that it's on. It's not doing the red X this time. So I guess that's better. Want to make sure everybody can hear me. If you can hear me, kind of check in on the comments. I'm going to wait till I hear somebody or see a response that someone can hear me before we get going. Can y'all hear me okay? Let's see. Hi, American Gorilla. Can you hear me? Five by five? I don't think that's the right number, is it? Okay, so just a couple of comments. Ma'am. Okay. So we've got the sound going, and I don't know why the video isn't working. So if I could figure that out, things would be great. So, all right, let's get going. I want to talk for just a second about something that we discovered and that I shared with Julie Beans when we had lunch yesterday. And that has to do with what we've been talking about on Operation Gladio, propaganda, and some of the things that you find when you go and do research. So, my husband and I, because I share all of my findings with my husband, God bless him, and he woke up 2 days ago and he looked at me and he goes, "Do you remember the show Get Smart?" And I said, of course I do. So um, he says to me that, do you remember what the names of the organizations, the good guys and the bad guys are? And I'm like, not off the top of my head. And he says, well, one of them's called chaos and the other one's called control. And I just looked at him and my mouth dropped open. I'm like, what the heck? And then he said, and the agent, Get Smart was, his number was Agent 86. And he goes, in a restaurant, if you want to nick something or kill it off the order or whatever, you 86 it. And I'm looking at him and I'm going, oh my gosh. So then I look up, I'd already looked up nines when we were talking about the CERN, because they have that weird symbol that says, oh, it's not 666, it's actually nines. Well, nines is in satanic verbiage like death and birth. And I'm like, my mind's blown right now. So they're telling you, you better get smart because they're creating chaos to control you. And that's all in one sitcom. So then we started looking at, let's see, I want to show you something. I'm going to share screen, see if I can do this. Would like to record this. Okay. So turn that on. Hold on, I got to put in a password here. I haven't ever shared screen on my husband's computer, who's I'm having to use since we're on the road. Okay, so let's see if it'll let me do it. Entire screen. Okay, so to share the entire screen, click the tab. All right, let's do this. Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. Oh my gosh. No, I don't want to leave site. It's trying to get me out of the Brave browser. I don't think I have to use the Brave browser to do StreamYard, and I'm on an Apple, and they don't like talking to each other. At least I don't know how to make them talk to each other really well. So if y'all are on your computer, go to Get Smart, and just type that in, and then click on the WikiLeaks link to that. Then go down to where it talks about the producers, and you're going to see that the producers of the show over on the right hand side is Mel Brooks and Buck Henry. If you look at Mel Brooks and his background, it's mind-boggling. Okay, he's from Germany, Jewish family, Poland. His mother's family was from Kiev, yeah, as in Ukraine. And then you go over to the other one, click on Buck Henry. Buck Henry, his real name is Henry Zuckerman. His mother, silent movie actress, and his family is also from Ukraine originally. So Jewish background, and you start looking at some of the work they've done. It's just, to me, it's mind boggling. And of course, we know that Germany is where the Operation Gladio got kicked off. So I just wanted to put that out there. And it was just crazy that anyway, I'm still mind blown by it. So American Gorilla is saying, look down for the red button. I did look down for the red button, and I don't can hear you but not see you next to the. So I saw that, but um, I have to go off this thing to get back to those icons, and it's actually selected. The last time I was on, it wouldn't let me select it or deselect it. So this time it shows like it's on, but my actual camera is not on my computer for some reason. And again, I don't, I'm away from home. I'm lucky I'm even on here. So let's get started. Now that I shared my mind blowing opportunity with you, we're going to talk about the papal problem, which is basically the Pope. So, where we've gotten so far, we've painted the picture of this huge network of our government, namely the CIA, um, Western governments, in all types of apparatus. Although, like I said before, this author likes to focus on the CIA. It was not just the CIA, it was all intel from Europe, Mossad, all of them are all in this. So, we're going to, for consistency's sake of this book, focus on the CIA, but I want to say each and every time it is not just the CIA. CIA is rotten to the core. It's not just them. And I don't want people to get focused on just one aspect of it. So, where we've gotten so far is we've painted the picture that the sources of poppy, i.e., drugs, heroin, moves around the world. And as it moves around the world based on the circumstances of particular countries and the indigenous people getting pissed off and kicking us out, or we lose the quote unquote war against communism when it was really just a war to secure poppy fields, we move around the world, from Vietnam to Afghanistan. We're getting ready to go into Turkey. And each time that operation moves, you still have some of the same players as far as the money laundering, drug trafficking, arms trafficking that goes along with that, the banking infrastructure that is used all over the world. So that's the picture that we're painting, and who are all the different elements of it. So when we closed last time, we were talking about the Catholic Church being 15% they charge to process all the drug trafficking cash to launder it, basically. So we're up to Pope Paul VI having died, knowing because of previous conclaves to elect the next pope, and the CIA had went into the Vatican and bugged all of the different offices. So they decide they're going to do secret balloting this time, and they put them, instead of in the luxurious apartments, they put them into basically like these criminal cells, and they have no running water, no toilets, because they didn't want it to take a whole long time. So they're all whining about living in harsh conditions. And at the start of the conclave, 111 cardinals were marched in silence into a chapel. They say their prayers. And one of them complained, saying that they were not treated like the princes of the Holy Mother Church, but prisoners in San Quentin. That's where they all should have been based on what they were doing. To make matters worse, the conclave took place in the midst of an oppressive heat wave. The temperatures in Rome were 94 degrees. They locked the doors, barred them. All of the windows were boarded up and sealed so that no one could leak out early like they did last time who the new pope was going to be. So they elected within like one of the shortest times ever a guy by the name of Albino Luciani. And they describe him as being a strange little fellow. And I guess he looked just like Peter Sellers, because one of the guys, when he came out, one of the journalists says, "Oh my God, that's Peter Sellers. They've made Peter Sellers the Pope." So that's an odd figure. The conclave may not have been bugged, but it was rigged. The CIA was fearful that one of their guys was not going to get elected, and so they basically got involved, and a couple of the ones that were the most likely to be elected had already stated in public that they wanted the Archbishop Marcinicus, that was in charge of the Vatican Bank after the Sedona affair, to be removed. And so there were people that the CIA definitely did not want in charge. Soon after Pope Paul suffered his first heart attack, the agency arranged for Cardinal John Cody, the Archbishop of Chicago, to travel to Poland and meet with Cardinal, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so we're just going to call him the Cardinal from Krakow. He's Polish, Wojtyla, and he had been very openly anti-communist, so he was a darling of the CIA. He also had been very open to the fallout of Operation Gladio. He thought all of that was a great idea. So he's definitely who the CIA wanted, and it's who they tried to get elected this time. Cody, the guy from the church in Chicago, and notice how all of the archbishops from Chicago are dirty. I'm sure that's just a trend no one has noticed. So Cody, by his own admission, was a CIA operative who had served the agency since the time it had been established. And we talked about that very early on in this book, and how in bed with the CIA and intel in general that the Catholic Church has been. They helped smuggle Nazis out of Germany just prior to the end of the war, and in the immediate aftermath. They even dressed them up in religious clothing to do that. They gave them sanctuary in the Catholic Church. So if you've not listened to some of the earlier ones, I would suggest you do that. They've been very involved. I'll just say it that way. So he had been, the Archbishop Cody had went to Saigon and all kinds of different places. Interestingly enough, all of the places that I was looking at some other material, they all had some correlation to where they grow poppy, just FYI. So the Roman Catholic Church in Chicago had over $1 billion worth of resources, and they kept them in David Kennedy's bank, the Continental Illinois Bank. And remember, David Kennedy was basically partners in Sedona, who was the guy that used to be in charge of the Vatican Bank. So obviously he's in on the grift as well. So during the 1970s, Cody diverted millions of dollars via Kennedy's Chicago bank to Marcinicus, who was now at the Vatican's bank. Marcinicus, in turn, would channel the money to the cardinals in Poland, including the Warsaw guy, or excuse me, Krakow guy. The reason for the transfers of such large amounts of money never got explained. The only ecclesiastical purpose for Cody's trip to Krakow was to cultivate that archbishop's interest in being a dark horse candidacy to be the pope. So while he was in Poland, Cardinal John Kroll from Philadelphia began to work the phones in order to support him being the next replacement instead of Peter Sellers. So he even was connected to Johnson, Kennedy, or excuse me, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. So they're like pulling out all the stops to get their guy in as Pope, which is very interesting for the intel. Um, it makes you think that it was way more than just money laundering that they were involved in. So one of the members that of the P2, which is the Masonic lodge that controls the church, had served Operation Condor by purging the Latin American Bishops' Conference of all of its proponents of liberation theology. And remember, we talked about that at the end of last time, where all of the coups that happened in South America, in especially Argentina, which was a predominantly Catholic country, was facilitated by the CIA, and they used the Operation Gladio units. And church, to include the current pope, was involved in the purging of any Catholic priest that taught anything other than what they approved of. Prior to the conclave, the cardinals with ties to P2 had a pre-meeting in the outskirts of Rome to plan alternative courses of action during the conclave. One alternative was the selection of Albino Luciani as the next pontiff. So they already had plotted to elect him prior to the actual conclave. The new pope called himself John Paul I and pledged to follow in the footsteps of his two predecessors. So few within the CIA had fancied him a threat because of his looks. And he was a very timid, kind of meek looking guy. So they felt very sure that they were going to be able to intimidate him to go along with all of their plans. John Paul was aware of the Vatican's involvement in a plot to sell $1 billion in counterfeit securities. The deal had been forged by Sedona, who made the arrangements for the preparation of the bogus securities with members of the Gambino family in New York. Phony bonds from companies such as AT&T, GE, Chrysler, Pan Am were delivered in July of 1971 to the Vatican Bank. The Archbishop Marquinez was in on this because he actually took some of them and passed them off at a Zurich bank and another bank in Rome just to check if anybody noticed they were fake. However, both of those transactions certified that those bonds were authentic. And so they're thinking they're going to get away with another big money laundering opportunity. Officials of both banks took samples of the bonds and sent them to the Bankers Association in New York and found that they were counterfeit. Word went out to Interpol and the Organized Crime and Racketeering Division of the U.S. Justice Department. They sought to interview a couple of different people, but the first cardinal that they sought to interview died of natural causes right before the interview. After questioning Marquinez, U.S. officials sought an indictment for his arrest, but the Nixon administration called a halt to the probe, and the case against the Archbishop was placed in the dead files of the FBI. Anybody that thinks that this is new, it's not new. So okay, just take a time out here. America Gorilla. I see where the mute button is and I see where the stop camera is. If I click them, red X over it. If I click stop camera, it puts a red X, and then if I click it, it puts my picture up there. If I unclick it, I get a black screen. So again, I don't know what's going on. All right. So 1 week after his election, John Paul received a preliminary report on the internal workings of the Vatican Bank from Cardinal Vollet. He remained as the Holy See Secretary of State. The bank, which had been formed to further quote unquote religious works, was now serving a distinctly secular purpose, and that was demonstrated by the fact that of the 11,000 accounts in the registry of the Vatican Bank, fewer than 1,650 had anything to do with the church. The remaining 9,350 accounts served as slush funds for special friends of the Vatican, such as the Sedona, Calvi, Gelli, Marquinez. All of these guys are the P2 Masons, people that were in the mob, people that was in the mafia, and several Corleone, all of these high-ranking Italian families, gangs, the mafia's head cashier. These are all people who had banks. Other accounts were held by leading Italian politicians and businessmen in service to Operation Gladio, and still others for the foreign embassies of Iran, Iraq, Indonesia, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and other countries. And remember what each one of those has in common. Every single one of them had been involved in coups, poppy growing, or drugs trafficking in some way. And they all had accounts at the Vatican Bank. So they also talk about in here how there's a gate in the back of the Vatican City that was like a major thoroughfare of people coming in and out carrying suitcases filled with cash right past the Swiss guards and up the stairs to the Vatican Bank. On September 7th, Cardinal Benelli, the Archbishop of Florence, conveyed to the Holy Father even worse news. The Bank of Italy was investigating the links between Roberto Calvi, who was the guy in charge of one of the Vatican banks, and the Vatican Bank. The church had several banks throughout Italy that were affiliated with the church and not technically under the scheme of the Vatican Bank. So they were also looking into Calvi's purchase of one of those banks from the Catholic Church in 1972. This purchase had occurred when John Paul was Archbishop of Venice. The sale had been made without his consultation. The transaction was mysterious. The bank was one of Italy's wealthiest banks with a vast real estate holding in northern Italy. Calvi, on behalf of one of the Vatican's banks, purchased 50% of the shares for $46 million, which is basically $2 billion in today's money. But the shares never left the Vatican. Instead, the stock was just reassigned to Zitrapo, a company owned by Sedona. Zitrapo was then sold to Calvi, and in 1978, the company was acquired back by the Vatican. That's called money laundering. All this time, the shares of the bank had never left the Vatican safe. So, in addition, the final report Cardinal Benelli told the Pope could result in criminal charges not only against Calvi, but also leading Vatican officials, including Archbishop Marquinez and his two close Vatican Bank associates, Menini and Strobel. Neither Cardinal Benelli nor the Pope were aware that the troublesome matter of Judge Alessandrini was under control and that the criminal charges would not be filed against Calvi or his Vatican Bank cohorts. On January 29th, 1979, 5 gunmen murdered the Italian magistrate when his orange Renault stopped for a red light. The action accomplished its purpose and the investigation was closed. That's the Italian mafia way. Um, you got a problem, you kill them. The most appalling revelation happened on September 12th when John Paul sat down at his desk to discover the latest copy of a Vatican newsletter published by Mino Pecorelli contained a list of 121 leading Catholic clerics and laymen who were also members of the Masonic Lodge and had ties to Gelli and P2, which was basically the Vatican Masonic Lodge. If the list proved accurate, the Pope would have no recourse but to excommunicate all of these people in accordance with canon law. At the top of the list was the name of Cardinal Jean Vallot, the Vatican Secretary of State. His Masonic name was Jeanni, Jeanni. Now, why would he have a woman's name as a Masonic name? He was enrolled in the Zurich Lodge. And so they contacted Zurich and they verified that, yes, indeed, he was a Zurich Lodge member. Another name on the list was Cardinal Baggio, whose Masonic name was Seba, Seba. Weird names. They confirmed that he too was definitely one of the Masons. But last but not least was Marcinicus, which we already know because we discovered, like back in chapter 2, that he was part of that Masonic Lodge with Gelli, which is how he got the job. So John Paul, however, was neither a spiritual warrior nor a determined reformer. So everybody was kind of wondering what he was going to do about that because they definitely thought he was too timid to take them on. However, reliable sources contend that the new Pope was moved to action with this latest revelation and that he was going to announce on September 28th his decision to remove all of them from their current position. He was going to reassign some, he was going to make others retire, and this contention is supported by declassified documents from the State Department and the CIA. The presumed papal simpleton, who's ceaselessly, I guess, so this Pope used to talk about how fond he was of Pinocchio for some strange reason. And that is what shocked all of these people, that he was actually going to hold them accountable. So, of course, you know what happens. And there was a lot of things going on right now with Southeast Asia and the transferring of drug operations. So the last thing these guys needed was a Pope going rogue on them. So, and they couldn't dare lose their money laundering capability at the Vatican Bank. So, of course, they come up with a scheme. The morning after John Paul made the alleged announcement, he was found dead under conditions that continue to be unexplained. At 4:30 in the morning, Sister Vincenza's normal routine was to knock on his door, leave a pot of coffee in the hallway. She came back by and he had not gotten his coffee, which was very unusual. So she knocked on the door again, and when she didn't hear anything, she walked in the room. She found the Pope sitting up in bed with his eyeglasses halfway down his nose. His fingers were clutching a file, and the papers were strewn across the bed covers. The Pope's lips were pulled back in a grimace, and his gums were exposed. His eyes appeared to have been popped out of their sockets. That's gross. So she screams, and John Paul's secretary comes running up and telephones Cardinal Volée. Well, weirdly enough, he immediately says, "Does anybody else know that he's dead?" McGee replied on the phone that no one knew except the nun. Volée then tells McGee that no one, not even Sister Vincenza, must be allowed to enter the Pope's bedroom, and that he would handle the matter as soon as he arrives. Volée appeared in a matter of moments, and to McGee's amazement, the cardinal was shaved, groomed, and in complete dress. It seemed as though he was already set to make a public appearance, and it was only 5 o'clock in the morning. Volée began placing items of the Pope's bedroom in a satchel, including a vial of low blood pressure medicine that he kept on his bedstand. They took his last will, the appointment book, removed his glasses, his slippers. None of these things were ever seen again. Volée telephoned the Vatican physician, Bozzanetti, and instructed McGee to make arrangements for the immediate transfer of the nun that found him to a cloistered environment of her mother house in Venice. At this point in the story, the nun disappears. There's never an investigation on what happened to her, and she's never seen again. Later, it's announced that she died shortly after arriving. I'm betting she never made it. So the Pope, it's announced that the Pope had suffered a coronary occlusion, that he had died the previous night, and this is all done immediately. I mean, they don't know what he died of, but they announced that that's what he died of. That he didn't suffer, but none of that makes any sense based on the fact that his eyes are bugging out of his head and his face is frozen in some contorted, horrific look. So shortly after the physician left, two morticians, their brothers, appear, and it's 6 a.m. And they point out the fact that from where they had to come from and the fact that they had to get transportation, there's no way they could have gotten there at 6 o'clock if they hadn't have already known he was dead. So they show up and they immediately start embalming him. They don't drain his blood. They don't move him to a morgue. They do nothing. They're like pumping this garbage in. And that's not even allowed based on canon law. You're not allowed to do any of that because there's a whole, maybe he can be put up to be a saint and all of this other stuff. So nothing they're doing is right. They change his face, they put it all back to normal and they cut him open and basically start pumping this, I always refer to it as antifreeze, into his body. So while the Pope body is being infused with this fluid, Volée instructs McGee to relay to the world a fabricated story about the morning's events. McGee says to say not to mention the sister at all, that they found the Pope's body. He was to make no mention of the papers being strewn about the bed, and so they concoct this big story. And he dutifully goes out and does that. At 6:45, one of the sergeants running around came upon Archbishop Marcinus in a courtyard near the Vatican Bank. And this was very unusual because he was a very late riser. He lived 20 miles away from the Vatican, and he never showed up before 9 a.m. So he blurted out the news that the Pope was dead. And later on, because he showed no emotion or didn't respond at all, he later tried to make the excuse, "Oh, I thought he said he dreamed the Pope was dead," to try to explain his non-reaction. So Vatican Radio made the following announcement, quote, This morning, September 29th, 1978, about 5:30, the private secretary of the Pope, contrary to custom, not having found the Holy Father in the chapel of his private apartment, looked for him in his rooms and found him dead in the bed with a light on, like one who was intent on reading. The physician, Dr. Bozanetti, who hastened to the Pope's room, verified the death, which took place presumably around 11 o'clock yesterday evening, as quote unquote sudden death that could be related to an acute myocarditis infarction. I don't, did they have vaccines back then? Just joking. Despite Cardinals Vollet's care in fabricating the fiction, the story quickly came apart. The first problem came with John Paul's copy of what he was supposed to be reading wasn't even with him in Rome. It was left in his apartments in Venice. So he couldn't have been reading what they said he was reading. And the Vatican was forced to admit that that was not the case, and that he had papers in his hands, excuse me, that were personal writings. Then they later admitted that he was clutching papers concerning his decision to make critical changes in the Vatican Bank. The second problem came with the work of the morticians. Italian law dictated no embalming should be undertaken within 24 hours of a death without a magistrate's permission. And then, of course, the draining of the blood, which didn't occur either. So there's things published on the front page of stories. Why say no to an autopsy? Well, then they said, well, we're not allowed to do autopsies, which that also is a lie. Then there was a story of the cardiac issue. The Pope was a runner. He was an exerciser. He was in perfect condition. He had never had a diagnosis of any cardiac problem at all. As a matter of fact, the medication they did find there in Stoll was low blood pressure medicine. He was not going to have a heart attack. There was nothing wrong with him. And so it comes out, obviously, so they have to come up with another story. And then when they talked about why didn't you do an autopsy, and they said, oh, well, you're not allowed to do those. Well, as a matter of fact, one pope had already had an autopsy in 1830. So that was a big lie too. So rumors quickly became rampant that John Paul had died of poisoning as opposed to a cardiac event. The brother Fabian, the Vatican's pharmacist, used this theory to provide a final explanation for the Pope's demise. John Paul, he said, was taking dioxin for a heart problem and could have swallowed a few extra pills and then took a slug of some other drug and had tragic results. But neither one of those drugs was in his possession at the time. So, no, he couldn't have done that either. So, when they start lying and their lies start coming unraveled, you know they're lying. All right. So now we've got a vacancy again. But this time the CIA is not going to let some little Pinocchio loving interloper derail their plans to get the guy they want from Poland. So it's announced that not only are they going to get the guy from Poland, but he's going to take the name John Paul II. And everybody's shocked because he's like a junior guy. He was not anywhere near the seniority that anyone would have been elected as Pope. So, anyway. And they did it again in 2 days. So, everybody knows this is rigged. They also talk about how unusual he looked compared to all of the previous popes. I guess popes are normally more fragile looking, I'll put it that way. the word I was, never mind, I won't say it. But this guy's a big guy. Says he describes he has a hulking physical frame and non-intellectual mannerisms. So that's interesting. And they describe his quote unquote lack of refinement and talks about him putting his hands together and yelling at people like he was a cheerleader at a football game. And that's just like totally not allowed. So they also find out that as a young man, he wanted to be an actor and not a priest. He may have actually even been married, and he was a womanizer. So they're all beside themselves on how this happened. The normal people, not the inside people, because of course they know how it happened. The CIA made it happen. So, in once he gets coronated, if that's what they call it, once he's into the office, they have a big party and they're clinking glasses of champagne and cheering each other. And then, of course, all of the former P2 Mason hierarchies in the church, Marquinus and all of the rest of them are at the Vatican Bank, are all now safe in their jobs again because he's not going to make any changes because he's on the payroll. So, going into the second chapter, we're going to talk about the new network that's going to form because of the fall of Saigon. So, just like we were talking about at the beginning, the war machine goes in and destabilizes countries so that they can set up and harvest the poppy fields under the guise of this war. But then once the war comes apart on them, they have to move their poppy fields somewhere else. And generally, what I've noticed is this communist threat that we've told is such a bad thing. And I'm not saying that it's not a bad thing, but I don't think it is what we have been told it is, because it was Mao in Vietnam that destroyed all the poppy fields. And as the communists take over these locations, they throw out the CIA and they throw out the poppy production. And so I just find that extremely interesting. I'm trying to wrap my head around what all of the implications of that are, but there's something a lot bigger going on here. So the CIA wants to move their operation that was going on in Vietnam to the Golden Crescent, which is the highlands of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, also parts of Turkey. So a new source of drug revenue is needed. So that's what they've got their eyes set on. By the 1950s, very little opium was being produced in Afghanistan and Pakistan, with only about 2,500 acres under cultivation. At the close of the Vietnam War, the fertile growing fields of Afghanistan's Helmand Valley were covered with vineyards, wheat, and cotton, not poppy. The major problem for the CIA was the Afghan government of Taraki, who sought to eradicate poppy production in the border regions of the country that remained occupied by radical Islamist fundamentalists. He wanted to turn his country into something good, not a drug supply for the world. This attempt at eradication sprang from Taraki's desire to unite all the Pashtuns tribes under a Kabul rule. The fundamentalists didn't like that. The modernist regime advocated for female education and to prohibit arranged marriages and the bride price. By 1975, the tensions between the government and the fundamentalists had erupted into violence when Pashtun tribesmen mounted a revolt in the Panjshir Valley north of Kabul. The tribesmen were led by Hekmarda, who became the new darling of the CIA. Now, I just want to stop for just a second, because what we've been told by the international syndicate is The whole reason we went into Afghanistan after 9/11 was what? Female education, and to stop having arranged marriages, and to protect the people there when they had that, and it was at the hands of the CIA that destroyed it. Hekmarda made his public debut in 1972. Now, I also want to point out something. We're talking about growing drugs in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. 1972 is also the date that the corrupt bank of BCCI was set up. And for those that don't know, BCCI is the bank, and all of the people associated with it are criminals. It's the biggest money laundering, drug trafficking, arms trafficking bank. I mean, and we will find out in a few minutes, but it grew to be one of the top 10 banks in the world based on this trade. And it's not coincidental that the Afghanistan CIA clown was installed in 1972, around the time of 1972. It wasn't actually installed then. But the BCCI bank is being set up to facilitate this transfer from Vietnam to the Golden Triangle. So Hekmarda made his public debut at the University of Kabul by killing a leftist student. He fled to Pakistan, where he became an agent of the ISI, Inter Services Intelligence. And for those who know, they know that that's the vehicle the CIA used to funnel money into the Afghans during the Russia or Soviet fight with Afghanistan. The ISI was funded by the CIA, and they allowed them to go into Afghanistan and dole out our money into supposedly funding the resistance against the Soviets. So they're basically dedicated to the formation of a quote unquote pure Islamic State ruled by Sunni law. Hekmarda urges his followers to throw acid in the faces of women not wearing a veil. This is who the CIA hired. He also advocates kidnapping rival Islamic chieftains. He began to build up an arsenal courtesy of the CIA. They funneled millions to ISI, which became its surrogate on the Afghan border. The CIA believed that Hekmarda, despite the fact that he was clearly unhinged, would be of value to them in undermining the Taraki government, but also in gaining the poppy fields in the Helmand Valley. Throughout 1978, a year before the Soviet invasion, Hekmarda and his mujahideen burned universities and girls' schools throughout Afghanistan and gained feudal power over the poppy farmers. The pro-Taraki militants, aware of the destabilization plot, assassinated Adolf Spike Dubs, the U.S. ambassador to Kabul. Now they say that they assassinated him, but there actually is no proof who did the assassination. If you do research on that, this Adolf Dubs guy, whose nickname was Spike, is also from Chicago. He's a Catholic. His former postings was in Moscow, Germany, and Yugoslavia. And that's important because of the stay-behind units. So after the coup, he was kidnapped, and there's a lot of information about his kidnapping. And weirdly enough, 2 of the 4 people that kidnapped him was killed right after they heard the gun go off in the hotel that they were keeping him in. And when the people burst down the door and went in, they could have arrested the other two. And what do you think they do with them? They kill them too. So obviously, they didn't want to know or to have any person alive as to who had kidnapped and assassinated the U.S. ambassador. So it sounds like a setup to me just to blame somebody that they don't want. So anyway, thanks to the Heck Marta's actions, heroin production rose from 400 tons in 1971 to 1,200 tons in 1978. So basically, Afghanistan comes online producing poppy as Vietnam goes offline. And guess where else we end up in a war? In Afghanistan. So if you think we're going into these wars because of communism, you're full of crap. We're going into these wars to protect the CIA's drug trade. No doubt about it. So, in the summer of 1979, 6 months before the Soviet invasion, the U.S. State Department issues a memorandum making it clear its stake in the Mujahideen, quote, the U.S. larger interest, ... would be served by the demise of the Taraki regime, despite whatever setbacks this might mean for future social and economic reform in Afghanistan. Let me read that again. They don't give a shit about social and economic reform in Afghanistan. The overthrow of the DRA, the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, and their duly elected president would show the rest of the world, particularly the third world, that the Soviets' view of the socialist course of history as being inevitable is not accurate. So they think, again, this is 6 months before the Soviet invasion, that they're showing the third world that, hey, the U.S. has got it going on and that communism is not inevitable. What happened in Afghanistan was worse than communism. In September of 1979, Tariki was killed in a coup organized by the Afghan military officers at the behest of the CIA. The guy that was in charge was installed as the new president's last name is Amin. He had impeccable Western credentials. He was educated at Columbia. He was educated at the University of Wisconsin. He served as the president of the Afghan Student Association there, which was funded by the Asian Foundation, which is a CIA front company. Excuse me. After the coup, he met regularly with U.S. embassy officials, while the CIA continued to fund Hekmarta's rebels in Pakistan. Fearing a fundamentalist U.S.-backed regime at its borders, that is when the Soviets decided to invade in Afghanistan. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. The Soviets just did their special military, or excuse me, Russia, their special military operation in Ukraine. Why? Because of the encroachment of their border by the CIA Western affiliated henchmen. So they have literally taken every bit of the Russian border and compromised it with their goons and their the people that they've installed in these people and the CIA has interfered in every single one of these people's elections, every single one of them. So they've got Western indoctrinated people all along the border in Georgia and all of these different former Soviet, and they see their the writing on the wall, if you will, and what they were doing in the biolabs in Ukraine. And basically, what I just described to you in Afghanistan is the exact same thing. They see, because at the time, Afghanistan was one of the ways that Russia was able to get to fresh water. And they had been working with Turkey and had great relationships with them. And so they watch on their border as the US CIA comes in, takes the guy out, and installs their goon, starts going drugs on their border, and knows bad things are about to happen. So they go ahead and launch an invasion into Afghanistan. And obviously, we know that the entire State Department was laughing their butts off. And there was also some false flags going on there to entice Russia into, or Soviets into Afghanistan. Because they're now saying, and Brzezinski and all of them, this is going to be the Soviets' Vietnam. That's what they called it. So the CIA got what they wanted. The Holy War had begun. For the next decade, black aid amounting to more than $3 billion would be poured into Afghanistan to support the Holy Warriors, making it the most expensive covert operation in U.S. history. Such vast expenditures demanded an exponential increase in poppy production in order to pay for it, which Hekmarda and his fellow jihadists were pleased to provide. So there you go. The war in Afghanistan delighted the State Department officials, and it just gives you the quote that I already did. They were just happy that they got the Soviets, because they knew that's going to weaken the Soviets. And he says, yeah, this is worth quoting. This is Brzezinski's quote: "For America, the chief geopolitical prize is Eurasia. Now a non-Eurasia power is preeminent in Eurasia, and America's global primacy is directly dependent on how long and how effectively its preponderance on the Eurasia continent is sustained. ... To put in a terminology that harkens back to the more brutal age of ancient empires, the three great imperatives of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals, to keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together." The arrogance of that bastard talking like that about other people. So he's saying that as long as you keep the barbarians, talking about the Afghans, the Pakistanis, from coming together, then America can continue its global preeminence. That's the people that represented the United States in our government. He and his fellow members, the elite group, which I call the International Syndicate, in their efforts to bring about the New World Order, realized that the concept of democracy and freedom could never galvanize the scattered tribes and people of Central Asia. So this is the one place they didn't scream, democracy, democracy, because those people already had democracy. They had elected a president that we just overthrew. The people could only be unified by the cause of Allah, since they were overwhelmingly Islamic. Yeah, because those people don't want freedom at all. In the view of the American geostraticists, they offered benefits, and this whole thing offered the additional benefit of basically screwing around with the Soviet Union, and the possible access and control over natural gas and the oil of Eurasia. Months before the Soviet invasion in 1979, the CIA launched Operation Cyclone, an attempt to destabilize the Soviet Union by spreading militant Islam throughout the Central Asian republics, which, of course, are like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and all of the different stands along the border there. So they're going to flood militant Islam through all of those countries and destabilize every single one of them in an attempt to destabilize the Soviet Union and screw the people that get killed in the meantime. And then it talks about how basically the CIA helped to create, and they name a whole bunch of them. They are basically Islamic Gladio units. Um, the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, the Umelma Islam, um, a, another group in Pakistan, Al Jihad group, um, just one after another. So they're basically talking about setting up Islamic Gladio units through all of those countries to disrupt and destabilize them in their war against the Soviets. It would also give rise to numerous terrorist attacks and kill and maim millions of people throughout the world in the dream of a new Islamic world order, which would be espoused by Gulen and his disciples. And so then we transfer over to the topic of BCCI. And it goes back and reiterates the fact that it was established in 1972 and was set up in Karachi by Agha Hassan Abdidi, a financier who had deep connections to the Pakistani underworld. So you have these oil rich sheiks in Abu Dhabi. It represented the ideal spot for the CIA to set up its money laundering outfit in the Golden Crescent. So, thanks to the CIA, the BCCI was registered in Luxembourg and soon mushroomed into a vast criminal enterprise of 400 branches in 78 countries, including First American Bank in Washington, D.C., the National Bank of Georgia, and the Independence Bank in Encino, California. Virtually free from scrutiny, it engaged not only in laundering the heroin proceeds, but also arms trafficking on a grand scale, including sale of French-made jet fighters to Chile and Chinese silkworm missiles to Saudi Arabia, all through this bank. In 1975, it became the seventh largest financial institution in the world, handling money from. Now, I just think about this. If I gave you a list of Saddam Hussein, Manuel Noriega, Abdul Nidal, Osama bin Laden, Liberian President Samuel Doe, and the Medellin cartel. If I gave you that list of people, would you know that whatever they all had in common had to do with the CIA, and it is where they bank? Every single one of those people banked at BCCI. CIA Director William Casey made regular visits to BCCI headquarters in Karachi, Pakistan. The agency had all kinds of different ways of paying bribes um, and funneling cash to assassins. The enormity of the bank's operations was evidenced by a transfer of $4 billion in covert aid to Iraq from 1985 to 1989. For the Iraqi transfer, the BCCI made use of the Atlanta branch of an Italian bank with ties to the Vatican Bank. Henry Kissinger sat on that bank International Advisory Board, along with Brent Scowcroft, who was George H.W. Bush's national security advisor. So you have the national security advisor and the Secretary of State sitting on a board of a bank that is money laundering and selling weapons. John Bath, an alleged CIA operative, became one of BCCI's directors. While serving the Pakistani bank, Bath was the co owner of Arbusto Energy, a Texas oil company, with future George W. Bush. Camille Odom, a fellow BCCI official, served, according to the Kerry Commission, as the principal liaison for the CIA in the entire Middle East from the 1960s through 1979. Whew. And so then you ask, how in the world can a world bank like that survive for so long? Well, apparently Price Waterhouse, a quote unquote prestigious London accounting firm, we need to do a dig on Price Waterhouse because they are the ones that went to Castle Bank in the past. They also are at BCCI giving them perfect bill of health in all of their accounting processes. And when you, Whitney Webb's book about Blackmail of America goes into detail about BCCI and their criminality. And it's so blatant what they were doing with all the shell companies and shell banks and everything else. The fact that Price Waterhouse could certify that their annual statements was legit is just atrocious. So in 1971, the BCCI, like so many other CIA banks, went belly up, leaving a financial hole of $13 billion with a B. So subsequently, Price Waterhouse was sued for damages of $11 billion and settled out of court. Ironically, in the wake of this settlement, the Vatican turned to Price Waterhouse to certify their balance sheets. So, oh my gosh. And they did it. So you've got Price Waterhouse, who just settled an $11 billion lawsuit for faking the books of BCCI, and the Vatican reaches out to him and goes, hey, come help me. And why they would even do that, who knows? Because the Vatican, by their own definition, books are completely secret. No one looks at their bank books at all, by law. That's the way it was set up. So, in its opening statement regarding the CIA's relationship to BCCI, the Kerry Commission maintained the relationship involving BCCI, the CIA, and the members of the United States and foreign intel communities have been among the most perplexing aspects of understanding the rise and fall of BCCI. Yeah, that's bullcrap. It's not perplexing at all. It's quite obvious, as a matter of fact. The report goes on to say key players who might explain these relationships are mysteriously unavailable. Some included former CIA Director William Casey and the BCCI customers, an Iranian arms dealer, and they named two people. They're dead. Others, including most of the BCCI key insiders, remain held incommunicado in Abu Dhabi. While promising public hearings to provide full cooperation, to date, the Abu Dhabi government has refused to make any BCCI officers available. And another guy had a heart attack. He couldn't be made to testify. And finally, some of the people in a position to know portions of the truth have denied having any memory of any event that they actually participated in, and there was documents to substantiate that. But I have forgotten. Establishing Turkey as a pivotal center in the heroin route from the Golden Crescent was a relatively easy task for the CIA because by this time, we're already up into the 70s, so by this time they're experts at it. The CIA had infiltrated the Turkish Secret Service, and they had people on the inside that they had brought over to the United States and educated, and then they send them back over there and fully fund the growth of these organizations to be quote unquote secret intel organizations. In this one particular case, they not only paid for all of the personnel training and equipment, they built them a torture chamber. So, throughout the 70s, the CIA also continued to train and support counter guerrilla organizations in Turkey. And their Gladio unit there was called the Grey Wolves, which is interesting because, as we pointed out at the beginning of this, the original name of Gladio units were werewolf units. They were founded by Germany, and they were citizens by day and werewolf killers by night. And so the fact that Turkey even named theirs Grey Wolves is, of course, a hat tip to the um, Gerland's werewolf units from the 1942 Nazis. The recruits were trained at paramilitary centers in Ankara, and then it lists a whole bunch of other ones throughout the country of Turkey, as well as Cyprus, by members of the U.S. Special Forces, including Green Berets. They were given basically training manuals from our service to create secret soldiers, to launch terror attacks, and to blame the communists. You know, Gladio unit. So they become the militant arm of the pan-Turkish movement, embraced the training wholeheartedly because they believe they're racially superior to everyone. And of course, they're interested in restoring the Ottoman Empire. So, nothing wrong with that. Let's give them money and teach them how to be terrorists. The latter belief necessitating the elimination of the Kurds in the southeast region of the country. They hate the Kurds in Turkey. In 1976, there were 1,700 Grey Wolf organizations within Turkey and about 200,000 registered members with well over 1 million sympathizers. That's an army. So you've got the Grey Wolves in Turkey, and excuse me, the Turkish underworld or mafia is called Babas. So I'm going to call them the mafia because Babas sounds weird. You've got those two basically getting in bed with each other, and they would later, one of their members, irony of all ironies, is the guy that ends up shooting and nearly killing Pope John Paul II. So one of these werewolf unit guys that the CIA's funding, and they're money laundering all of their drug monies from the poppy into the Vatican Bank, tries to kill the Pope, who's allowing all of it to happen. By 1975, the DEA says that there's multi-billion-dollar contraband operation all being financed by the sale of narcotics. So you got the guys, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here, but basically it explains how working with Naples and Milan, they're setting up a network just like we saw set up in Italy, and just like we saw set up in Vietnam. They're setting up a network with a whole bunch of different people involved in trafficking the drugs out of Turkey. And in 1977, meetings held between the Babas and the Dons, which are the mafia guys that are basically going to be processing the poppy coming out of Turkey, have a meeting. And so at one point, the guy who couldn't make the deal, that was sent to make the deal with the mafia on behalf of the Turkish people, when he got back and said he couldn't make the deal, they clubbed him to death. So that definitely motivates you to make a deal. So they meet at a hotel to come up with the deal. And basically, that whole organization was paid for, the whole meeting at this very elaborate hotel was paid for by an organization called Kintex, Kintex, which is an official arm of the Bulgarian government. And keep in mind that Bulgaria is all into the Gladio units as well. Kintex was formed in 1968 by a top ranking member of the Bulgarian Security Service. Its primary function was trafficking in illegal arms to right wing Turkish groups, including the Grey Wolves. They also sold to the PLO in Lebanon and the government of Israel. With the opening of the drug route from the Golden Crescent, it became the first outfit to offer morphine base as payment. The firm was used extensively by NATO and the CIA. One of the typical Kintex deals was 459 rocket launchers and 100,000 missiles, shipped in May of 1977 from the Black Sea port of Burgas in a Kintex freighter under a Cyprus color flag. The vessel was skippered by a Greek captain. The provenance of the munitions appeared to be a NATO naval base, and the customer was believed to be Israel. Duane Claridge served as a CIA station chief in Ankara at the time of these meetings. He allegedly worked with the Grey Wolves and Kintex and became a key figure in arms for drugs business. He ends up writing a book but makes no mention of any of this in his book. Imagine that. After the new drug network was established, he became the station chief in Rome. Where the money laundering is going to happen. And he remained there until the attempted hit on John Paul II. I'm sure he had nothing to do with it. I'm wondering if John Paul II didn't have a change of heart, and that's why they tried to kill him. Just a guess. The final agreement, the Capos agreed to pay the Babas for their morphine with shipments of arms, including tanks, Cobra helicopters fully loaded with rockets and guns, and rocket launchers. Where the hell did they get that from? Oh, from a German arms dealer who worked in Germany's Secret Service. But we're supposed to believe this is all the CIA. So they're taking shit out of NATO's arsenals in Western Europe and selling them to these people for drugs. Now, you know why we fund NATO? The operation at the start was tightly ran with Milan as its hub. The heroin base was smuggled into Italy by ethnic Albanians. Now, having lived in Italy, I find this part very interesting because one of the biggest problems Italy had was they have the exact same issue that we had when the Cubans were coming boat after boat after boat onto the shore. And the whole time that I lived in southern Italy, it was not uncommon to drive to work and find hundreds of Albanians just walking the road with backpacks on. And now I'm looking at this going, holy crap. So they were basically bringing Albanians in as part of a smuggling operation carrying cash. And now, I mean, how easy would it be to have these people, quote unquote, boat people, come ashore, jump the train, run up to Rome with backpacks full of cash, and then go right back? That just blew my mind when I read that part, because I watched that happen. I'm not going to tell you that I picked up one of them and took them to the nearest town either. Boy, what some things people will do. So anyway, then they talk about the whole network about putting the heroin. They took them to the Corsican chemist and the Sicily guys. Then they load them on freighters and ship them to the United States. So, also, I just want to pose right for just a second. Every bit of these drugs end up in the United States. So, you have an entire force of people under the guise of the CIA going all over the world, cultivating drugs, setting up criminal enterprises to buy the drugs, traffic the drugs in exchange for weapons that are being funneled through NATO. And all of it results in drugs that they bring back to America to try to destroy America. That's being done by the CIA. So, anyway, back, we're almost done. Got 2 pages. So, we end up with a uh, okay. So we've got people running all over the state of Israel, not Israel, sorry, Italy, and you've got the a the United States, a Milan shipping company, and they're trying to describe this whole network, and they've got a firm that was located in one of the Vatican banks, ran by a 67-year-old Henry Arson, who was known as the Playboy of the mob. Um, he wore gold chains, hung around with loose women, and he had um, all kinds of different jobs for the CIA, ran different uh, shell companies, and there was a general that was also the head of the military intelligence agency in Italy. He was one of the P2 Mason members as well. And Santovito is the guy, he's the military intelligence agency chief who played a part in the Moro kidnapping that we talked about last time. He also was responsible for purging all traces of the Turkish mafia present in St. Peter's Square after the Pope was shot. So they've got this entire network all put together. Almost overnight, um, one of the guys that was involved in this network had become a multi-billion-dollar concern, providing drugs to the American mafia and arms to a vast array of clients concerning AK-47 rifles, Nicaraguan Contras, the American missiles for Khomeini's regime in Iran. One of the most spectacular of the undertakings involved its sale of thermonuclear weapons to an Arab nation that they believe was either Syria or Saudi Arabia. This operation involved a Glauco Partel, described in the Italian press as being a missile expert who worked for the National Security Administration, and Eugene Bartholomew, a U.S. intelligence veteran who served the CIA at the Nugent Hand Bank in Australia. And remember that Nugent ended up dead in a car on the side of the road in Australia, and Hand fled and was never seen again. So that might be why, if they were dealing in nuclear weapons. The CIA official and former spooks such as Ted Shackley, who worked for private intelligence gathering agencies like Research Associates International, Milan became a one-stop shopping and snooping center. They had right-wing guerrilla armies of the day check in on the latest shipment of heroin. You walk down the street and you've got information on the Balkan route that it's taken. You walk down and you talk to somebody else about the gray wolves in Turkey. It's like one-stop shopping all right there in Milan. That's where the one Catholic affiliated bank that Gelly liked using and Sedona liked using. They also had the party of the Christian Democrat Party down the street, so you could figure out politically what was happening. And meanwhile, you've got people walking around with millions of dollars in cash um, on their way to get to the Vatican Bank. By the end of 1983, Calvi would be found hanging from a bridge in London, which was one of the guys involved in the Vatican Bank. Then Selleck and Gelly would be wanted fugitives, and Martinez would be a prisoner within the Vatican City, and Arson would be found dead in a jail cell. That's the high rollers. But in 1979, business was booming. As soon as the freighters were unloaded on the docks of Miami and New York, the heroin was trucked to, get this, y'all are going to love this. They took the heroin to pizza parlors owned by the Gambino crime family in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. I'm wondering if that's where the whole Pizzagate came from. Did they start using pizza parlors because they were originally used as heroin distribution? Just a thought. So the cash from the drug sales deposited in amounts less than $10,000 would flow from CIA controlled banks, including Continental Illinois, Castle Bank and Trust, BCCI, to the Vatican Bank and the Vatican chain of parochial banks throughout Italy. Eventually, the money laundered would come to involve many of the country's most prestigious financial firms like Citibank, the Bank of New York, the Bank of Boston, because it got so big that it couldn't just stay inside of the Vatican Bank and these small regional banks. In 1979, the flood of heroin from Afghanistan inundated the United States, capturing over 60% of the market. In New York City alone, the mob sold 2 tons of smack, which registered a dramatic increase in purity. Heroin addiction in the states climbed from 450,000 within a year, 22% to reach 500,000. Addictions, not just people testing it, addictions. The sons and grandsons of the mafia dons had elevated themselves out of the hands-on heroin trade. They basically wanted to live lavish lifestyles, but didn't want to partake in the nitty-gritty, like knocking off of people like their dads had done in the past. So basically, they hired the help out. And there's a new drug network that come to be called the Albanian Mafia, which did not flinch in committing random acts of violence. Within Italy, they began to perform such dirty work for the different gangs along the coast of the Adriatic Sea, which is where I lived. Eventually, the Italian mafia no longer spoke of the Muslim Albanians as foreigners, but as close friends. Throughout the 1980s, Albanian thugs became the chief perpetuators of the drug smuggling, counterfeiting, passport theft, forgery, trafficking in human body parts, sex, slavery, abduction, and murder. The influence of the criminal group grew to such an extent that in 1985, Italian's top prosecutor said the Albanian mafia posed a threat not only to the people of Italy, but the entire Western civilization. So basically, that kind of wraps up that part. There's a little bit more where it talks about the Muslim mafia in Italy, um, and how it grew because of the Balkan route that the drugs took from Turkey to Albania and then into Europe and into the United States. So basically, we created a whole nother mafia from the Albanian community in order to maintain this CIA drug running operations. So I want to run through some of the comments here real quick. So if y'all, I don't know if y'all can hear the screaming in the back. here in Biloxi, where we're at, the, the parking lot of a family amusement park is where we camp, that's directly on Highway 90. What I want to do is capture some footage and figure out how to upload it so everybody can see it, which I'll do in the next day or two, of the cars out on the Highway 90, because it's amazing all the different cars that are here. But I can hear in the background the cars going up and down Highway 90 on one side of our RV, and on the other side of our RV is the Family Fun Center, which is a roller coaster. And you hear these kids screaming as they're going down the roller coaster. It's hilarious. So, yeah, Mafia Pizza Parlors. I thought that was kind of interesting too. No coincidences. You're absolutely right. Um, you bastards. Yes, Julie, you're right. That's exactly what they are. Um, 80s trafficking types. Oh, absolutely. Um, oh, yeah. So I'll get the car video up. We'll probably be doing a lot of that tomorrow. But anyway, so that takes us, that does our 2 chapters for today. I'm going to try to help us get through the rest of this book. We're probably, we're better than halfway. Um, there's a few interesting stories to be told, though, for sure. Um, but also very interesting um, to look into some of these different things. Like I honestly had no idea how involved Albania was in this whole operation until I got to that part of the book. So yeah, I definitely need to do a little bit more research on the history of Albania, but I think it's fairly certain at this point that we all see the patterns, as Fada pointed out before, that you have countries who may or may not have been doing economically all that well, but they were having elections. They were going, living their life, living their best life. And because of the farmland or resources or whatever it was that the international syndicate decided that they wanted that was in that country, they literally just went in and plowed the entire country up. They created unforetold misery, death, in some cases, like Cambodia, millions of people, and they just didn't give a shit. And they walked away the minute it was no longer expedient. And you hear those quotes that I quoted of the Secretary of State, the Council of Foreign Relations, and how they talk about these people literally like they're cattle. So it's just very, very disgusting. I love the Rumble. I can listen and take notes for research. Awesome. And please find me on True Social if you guys decide to dig into any of these extra um, uh, like Albania or anything that we talk about. Please find me, because what I want to do then is post that so that we can talk about it the next time as well. So I want to go here real quick because Julie has posted. I need to just go back and find them real quick. We were doing chapters 11 and 12. So I've got chapters 12 there. Um, Julie has a whole bunch of references here that she copied out of the actual book and put them in written format for me. So they will give you extra things to look at. And I mean, it's a lot. So I'm going to put them in the comments section under the video in the area so that you can find them if you want to do some later research. So I just posted 12, and I will go back and find 11s, and I'm going to post them in the comments section um, so that y'all will have them as part of your research. if you want to use them. So, if do we have any other questions um, or anything that you want me to talk about, even if it's off topic? Um, I'll be happy to do that. Um, the last time I tried to put 2 comments, it wasn't going to let me do that. So I'm going to paste one of them over here. No, it's not going to let me do that either. I'll figure that out. I got 12s posted on there. Julie, if you can you post under the comments area of the video? Because it's not going to let me make another one. It might afterwards, but we'll see. If you guys have any other questions, they treat animals better. You're right, Feta. My bad. You're right. They definitely treat animals better. Well, I don't know. I've read about some of them. One of the guys was into slaughtering animals when he was growing up. So that had to do on over on Hidden Histories. One of the guys that was involved in the whole JFK. So I'm not sure about that. He may or may not. Okay, so that's all I got tonight, guys. I'm going to go look at a few cars, have some fun, and I will see you back. We probably are going to do this tomorrow. I'm going to try to get through as much as I can and finish this book up this week, and then y'all can look at it at your leisure. Because the beginning of next week I'll be in Austin visiting my daughter, and I probably won't get a chance to do a lot of these. I will definitely post pictures over on Truth Social. Thanks, you guys. Great chatting with you tonight.